Paris, the famous city of light, undisputed queen of world tourism, offers visitors a range of iconic monuments. The majestic Eiffel Tower, the imposing Notre Dame Cathedral, the Champs-Élysées, the solemn Arc de Triomphe, the White Basilica of the Sacred Heart, the historic Les Invalides Palace, the Pantheon, the modern Arc de la Défense, the Opera Garnier, and Bohemian Montmartre. Its museums, such as the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, are renowned for their art collections. Paris shines in the fields of culture, gastronomy, fashion, luxury. Saint Anthony Mary Claret lived in this city between November 1868 and March 1869, 4 intense months that we will retrace step by step. Queen Isabella II and her companions, including Father Claret, crossed the Pyrenees on September 30th, 1868, on their way to Paris.
They were fleeing Spain, where the Queen had been dethroned due to the revolution, called the Glorious Revolution. Before arriving in Paris, the entourage had stopped for 5 weeks in Pau.
There, the Queen stayed at the castle of Henry IV, while Claret and his 2 companions, Lorenzo Pugh and José Saladí, stayed in a house near the castle.
They left Pau on November 6 by train on their way to Paris, stopping in Bordeaux and Tours.
On November 6, 1868, at 11:30 p.m., Father Claret arrived by train in Paris, accompanying Queen Isabella II in her exile. The anticipation was widespread. The prince and the princesses descended first from the royal carriage, followed by Father Claret, the king consort, and finally Queen Isabella.
Then the rest of the entourage disembarked, 47 people in total.
During his stay, Father Claret devoted himself to the religious education of the prince and princesses, preparing the future Alfonso XII to receive his first communion. His financial situation, however, was precarious. In a letter to Chaffray, he confessed,
"My position has changed greatly in 3 ways. First, the government has decreed that I should receive nothing from Cuba. Second, the person who was to pay me the last of what I was owed after having collected all my money has declared bankruptcy. And third, the Queen no longer gives me or can give me what she used to give me."
In Paris, Claret did not escape media persecution. Republican newspapers accused him of stealing jewels from El Escorial and an image of the Virgin Mary. Fortunately, he also had defenders. The newspaper L'Inverse, translating the Times into English, wrote,
"Monsignor Claret, although he has no aptitude for the business of this world, which he completely ignores, is undoubtedly a clergyman who lives in the simplest manner, practices the most rigorous self-denial, and gives to the poor all that he has."
On March 30th, 1869, Claret left for Rome, where he would arrive on April 2nd. His goal? To get away from the political intrigues that were brewing in Paris over the return of the monarchy. From Rome on October 2nd, 1868, he wrote to Don Palladio Curios,
"I have suffered more than I am accustomed to. I am eager to die. I feel that I have already fulfilled my mission. In Paris and in Rome, I have preached the law of God, in Paris as the capital of the world, and in Rome as the capital of Catholicism."
As with St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, if one had to choose a religious symbol in Paris, it would be Notre Dame Cathedral. However, there is no documentary evidence that Claret attended religious services there with the Queen. The itinerary in Paris will be as follows: College of Saint Joseph, Saint-Nicolas de Beaujon, the Rohan Hotel, Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, Notre Dame de Beaujon, Church of Saint Roche. The College of Saint Joseph, which no longer exists, belonged to the nuns of the Congregation of Saint Joseph of the Diocese of Belley. It was located at 17 Rue Monceau, just behind the park of the same name in the heart of Paris.
The nuns were dedicated to teaching girls. 43 sisters were serving approximately 103 boarders, in addition to day students.
Father Claret stayed in the former house of the school chaplain, together with Don Lorenzo Puig and Brother Jose Saladich. They lived in total seclusion. He wrote to Doña Jacoba Balsola that from the church of Saint Nicolas, where he preached, many came to the school to confess.
His Majesty comes to this chapel in my house to receive the Holy Sacraments of Penance and Communion until he moves into the house he has bought, where a chapel is being built.
Every morning at 7 a.m., he celebrated Mass in the church without having to go outside. In the afternoon, they prayed Vespers, and he gave the blessing of the Blessed Sacrament. Sometimes he preached to the nuns in Spanish, and the chaplain translated into French. In his letters, he recounted,
Then I go to have breakfast. At 12:30 I eat, and in the evening I have a snack. The rest of the time I spend on matters of my ministry. The sisters cook for us, and Brother Jose serves us at the table.
On the feast of the Immaculate Conception, the Queen and her family accompanied him to this house, attending his Mass and sharing breakfast. He celebrated Christmas Eve and Midnight Mass there, with the girls singing. In the afternoon, they sang Vespers, and he gave a blessing with the Blessed Sacrament. Years later, an elderly nun said to Father Muñariz,
We owe it to Father Claret that our church was not viciously robbed, as was the house, because the vigilance of the servant of God late at night, if not inspired by a higher power, led to the sacrilegious robbers being caught in the very moment of continuing in the temple what they had done in the school buildings.
In 1881, the Bishop of Avila, Pedro Sanchez Carrascosa, wrote to Father Clotet,
Yesterday I had the immense joy of visiting the humble dwelling that our venerable Archbishop Claret occupied for 6 months in the little house at 21 Monsieur Street. How can I explain the impression it made on those humble nuns who kissed the floor our Holy Father walked on and comment on his words, actions, and virtues in a sense of holiness? How can I express the impressions on our soul as we contemplated the little altar in the chapel where he celebrated Mass and his bedroom, presided over by his portrait and that of Saint Teresa, which made me weep when I saw them? I have never had a more pleasant and moving experience.
We know that this period was peaceful and happy for Claret. In a letter to Mr. Miura, he said,
I am in this great city with great peace and tranquility. I am in good health, thanks be to God, much better than in other years spent in Madrid.
During his stay, he devoted himself to reading and writing small books. Don Lorenzo Puig recounted,
When Father Claret left for Rome, the nuns were so sad that the Mother Superior became ill. When they said goodbye, both the girls and the nuns cried profusely.
From the College of St. Joseph, we can take a short walk to the chapel of Saint-Nicolas de Beaujon. The chapel of Saint-Nicolas de Beaujon, named in honor of the patron saint Nicolas Beaujon, was a religious building that existed in Paris in the 18th century and was linked to the former property of Nicolas Beaujon, known as the Folies Beaujon. It was located on Rue du Faubourg du Roule, now Rue Balzac, number 8.
The interior was in the neoclassical religious architectural style, with galleries, side aisles, and an attic. The chapel was closed in 1795 during the French Revolution. Later, on March 29, 1805, Napoleon reopened it as a private chapel by imperial decree. This chapel was linked to the neighboring hospice of the same name in 1785. Honoré de Balzac acquired it in 1846. The complex was dismantled around 1885 and converted into the Hôtel Salomon, owned by the Rothschild family. After the demolition, the chapel disappeared. In place of the chapel, Balzac had a pavilion built, a circular building covered by a dome, inspired by the chapel of Saint Nicholas, which can still be seen today.
One of the highlights of Claret's stay in Paris was the Lenten talks he gave every Thursday in 1869 in this church. They were given in Spanish and required an invitation card. They were aimed at Spanish-American families living in Paris. The proximity to the neighborhood where Claret lived allowed him to attract many schoolgirls who lived near the Arc de Triomphe. The newspaper La Patrie, in a note signed by Mr. Mora, commented,
"For the first time, Spaniards living in Paris are gathered in that church, and he expresses the hope that these meetings will be the seed of a Spanish charitable association, which is necessary in Paris."
It continues.
Father Claret's talk continue at Saint-Nicolas de Beaujon and are very well attended. Many Spanish families attend, and we are told that the church is too small to accommodate all who attend. For this reason, the Reverend plans to give 2 talks per week. The chapel, which has a capacity of about 250 people, today received 272. If the distribution of invitation letters were not calculated and sent to all the families who are requesting them to attend these lectures, the chapel would be 4 times too small. Not to mention the numerous requests made by French and English families, the latter offering to pay for their seats as if they were opera bouses for a premiere.
In a letter to Mrs. Giacoba Balsola, dated March 28, 1869, Claret wrote,
"Our Lord God has chosen to use me to establish conferences of the Holy Family to help Spaniards who come to Paris from the Peninsula or America. Here, foreigners need protection, or else they despair and commit suicide. I was horrified the other day when I read that 1,200 people commit suicide in Paris every year."
In another part of the letter, he writes,
"For now, there will be 2 conferences, one for men and one for women, whose purpose is to shelter, protect, and find jobs for as many Spaniards as come forward. Everyone has thought this is an excellent idea. In the last spiritual conference or sermon I gave then, I explained the plan. We took up a collection to pay the expenses of the church, St. Nicholas, and I told them that whatever was left over would be used to start the conferences."
Despite its success, the Spanish liberal press did not cease its attacks. The newspaper El Chenchero, in its 1869 edition, satirized.
What blasphemies must Father Claret, the singer of Aïe Mama, have uttered in the church of St. Nicholas in Paris, when the French were forced to put a passport in his hand, begging him to go to Rome to finish singing that little song. Pius IX is therefore in luck. When he is sad, he will call on the Reverend Troubadour to sing him a jacara or some malagueñas. From now on, the Holy Father will not be able to be sad, for when it comes to joyful songs, there is no other Father Claret.
And the newspaper Gil Blas, on February 5, 1869, ironically stated,
According to what I read in a newspaper, Father Claret preached last Thursday in Spanish in the church of Saint-Nicolas de Beaujon. The news, although laconic, contains grave implications. I put my forehead on the palm of my hand and, absorbed, began to ponder. Where did Father Claret learn to preach? Where did he learn Spanish?
Let us leave these liberal ravings behind and move to the Hôtel Rohan. Today, on the corner of 172 Rue de Rivoli and Rue de Rohan, stands the luxurious Hôtel Louvre, heir to the former Hôtel Rohan.
This elegant Second Empire-style building, opposite the Louvre Museum on Place André Malraux, was built in 1855 by order of Napoleon III, under the direction of Prefect Haussmann. Its Haussmannian facade remains intact, a witness to an era of splendor. The entourage of the dethroned Queen Elizabeth II took up residence here in a 5-story mansion rented as a temporary residence. The Queen and her children occupied the first floor. The second and third floors were occupied by Isabella and other dignitaries with their families, and the top 2 floors by the servants. They remained in this hotel until the Basilisky Palace, renamed de Castilla, was acquired and refurbished on what is now Avenue de Kléber, near the Place des Étoiles.
Father Claret visited this royal residence 3 times a week. In his letters, he recounted,
On Mondays and Thursdays, I go to give lessons on religion and morals to the infantas. The prince goes to the college of St. Stanislas, which is run by priests and is the best in parish. He goes at 8 in the morning and leaves at 4 in the afternoon. And at 5, I go to prepare him for his first communion, which he will receive this year at Easter.
Given the distance, a car was sent from the College of St. Joseph to facilitate his travel. Father Claret comments,
At the palace, I prepared Isabella II for her vows at Saint-Germain, the Infanta Pilar for her first communion, and the prince to receive communion for the first time, although this was later postponed to have it verified in Rome by the Supreme Pontiff, Pius IX.
From there, we go to the church of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois. The church of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, the parish church of the kings of France, should not be confused with Saint-Germain-des-Prés.
Se encuentra en el lado sureste de la plaza del Louvre, justo frente a la columnata del palacio. Su fachada, con un porche de 5 huecos en estilo gótico flamígero, fue construida entre 1435 y 1439 por Jean Gasal, en tiempos de la ocupación inglesa. La nave principal, de casi 20 metros de altura, Se compone de 4 tramos góticos. Flanqueados por capillas laterales poco profundas.
The central nave, almost 20 meters high, consists of 4 Gothic bays, flanked by shallow side chapels. Its 16th century stained glass windows and numerous works of art, paintings, statues, and furnishings made this church a notable treasure.
The royal family attended liturgical celebrations here, sometimes accompanied by Father Claret.
Every Sunday, the Queen sends me the car, and at 10:30, we all go to Mass at the parish church of Saint-Germain.
From there, we set off for the church of Notre Dame de Beaujon. The Basilica of Our Lady of Victories, located on 6 Rue Notre Dame de Beaujon, was elevated to the rank of minor basilica in 1927.
Its history begins in 1629, when the Augustinian fathers of Paris, the Petit Père, laid the first stone, with the patronage of Louis XIII, dedicating it to the Virgin under the invocation of the Victories. Its walls are covered with more than 35,000 votive offerings, testimony to the faith and gratitude of generations. The basilica also houses several paintings by the French artist Louis-Michel Van Loo. Mozart came to this church in Paris to pray the Rosary. The family of Therese of Lisieux had a great devotion to this Virgin. The Archconfraternity of the Heart of Mary for the Conversion of Sinners was founded in the Church of Our Lady of Victories in Paris by Charles Degenet on January 12, 1837, and approved for the whole church by Gregory XVI in April 1838. By 1844, a manual of instructions and prayers was published in Malaga, and in 1845, the annals were published in Bilbao. It spread rapidly, achieving extraordinary success not only in France, but also in Italy, Spain, and other countries. Antonio Palau, founder of the Catholic magazine, was enthusiastic.
Father Claret, who saw in it an essentially apostolic devotion, propagated it tirelessly in Catalonia and Cuba. To this end, in 1847, he published in Catalan and Spanish a booklet entitled Brief Account of the Instructions of the Archconfraternity of the Most Holy and Immaculate Heart of Mary for the Conversion of Sinners. In addition, almost all his foundations and institutions bear the name of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. On November 14, 1868, Claret visited this church. A bulletin published by the Basilica briefly mentions Saint Anthony Mary Claret, although it has not been possible to place a commemorative plaque in his honor. A candle holder, a gift from the Infanta of Spain, is also preserved, apparently offered on the advice of Claret himself. Finally, we walk to the church of Saint Roche. The Church of Saint Roche is located on 284 Rue Saint-Honoré.
Its origins date back to 1521, when John Denachaux, a Parisian merchant, built a chapel dedicated to Saint Susanna. In 1577, His nephew, Stephen de Nassau, transformed it into a larger church, consecrating it to Saint Roch. Converted into a parish church in 1629, it was enlarged between 1653 and 1740, according to the design of Jacques Lemercier. With a length of 126 meters and a medieval-style floor plan, it is one of the largest churches in Paris. It has been listed as a historical monument since December 7, 1914. It has a magnificent organ. The writer, Alexandre Manzoni, was baptized in this church on April 2, 1810. And Corneille is buried there.
On February 27, 1869, Father Claret attended the annual solemnity of the Nativity of Saint Genevieve, celebrated in this place together with the Queen. Over time, the Claretian presence in Paris became consolidated. In 1913, the Claretian missionaries assumed responsibility for the Spanish mission at 51 bis Rue de la Pompe. Subsequently, 2 additional communities were founded and have since disappeared, one in Saint-Mandé and the other in Saint-Denis. The community of Rue de la Pompe is of interest because of its connection with the royal house, descended from Queen Isabella II, which keeps Claret's presence in Paris alive. In the church, we can see Claret in several places. In a chapel dedicated to him in the right nave, in a mural in the presbytery with other Spanish saints, and in a stained glass window in one of the naves where he is identified as an archbishop.
And in the community archive, we find several objects. An elegant paperweight belonging to Claret during his stay in Paris. A page in the guest book with the signatures of the descendants of Queen Isabella II, and photos of the presence of the remains of the infanta Isabella La Chata in the church on its way to the royal pantheon of the monastery of El Escorial in 1991.
It was she who gave the famous painting of Claret by Luis Madrazo to the house of the Claretian missionaries in Segovia, which is currently in the provincial curia of Madrid. We hope that this tour of Claret's Paris has been not only a journey through history, but also an enriching spiritual experience, accompanied by that great figure who was Saint Anthony Mary Claret, the tireless missionary in the midst of a court to which his heart never belonged.